This video is going to be an overview of the 22R-E engine and some EFI basics, some maintenance items, and some common issues and modifications. So start out with EFI basics. You measure the air going into the engine, and then the computer, depending on other variables, delivers the correct amount of fuel through the injectors, and it'll get the air-fuel mixture correct at the correct ratio. This truck, or this engine, uses a airflow meter, and there's a gate that opens up and is moved and moves the potentiometer inside there, and it obstructs the airflow a little bit. Newer vehicles use a mass airflow sensor, a MAF, and they use a different strategy to calculate the air velocity or the air volume based on the velocity. So there's a temperature sensor in here, and then there's a potentiometer on top of this gate that tells the computer how much air is going in there. From that, it knows that. One issue I had with this thing, with a different one that was on here, was the door was sticking. I couldn't pass smog, and it would run weird at idle every once in a while, and it was because the door was sticking. And eventually, I was like, I poked it a bunch of times, and like 1 at a time, 10 times, it wouldn't close all the way. So I got a new one from the salvage yard. Some people open these up to modify them or clean them or something like that. If you do that, make sure you seal it back up because of the big potentiometer and all the connections that are in there got to be clean to get an accurate reading. So there's different behaviors that occur when the engine is cold and when the engine is hot. Starting from when you turn the key, there is a cold start thermo time switch down on the front of the intake that has coolant going by it, so it knows the temperature of the engine. And there's a timer in it, and then there's a temperature sensor in it. And so when you turn the key, it will activate the cold start injector for a couple of seconds. It doesn't do it for too long, so that it won't flood the engine. So that can be a possible cause of bad cold start issues when it's difficult to start up. That can be tested. There are instructions in the manual. There are instructions online. LC Engineering and a bunch of other websites that sell parts provide troubleshooting and diagnostics so that you know you're getting the right part. Don't throw parts at things. Most things can be tested to where you don't have to guess and spend money that you don't need to spend. So next to the cold start injector is a green temperature sensor, and that's the temperature sensor used by the ECU that's down by your feet on the passenger side, is where it's mounted up next to the wall there. So that's where the ECU gets its temperature. Down in the middle of here, there's another temperature gauge or temperature sensor that runs the gauge on the dash. Some people get those mixed up or don't know that there's different ones there. When the engine is cold, the air idle control valve, this is a throttle body, and the air idle control valve is on the bottom of this and gets bolted on. And so when the engine is cold, it lets air pass by from here and then come out into there. And there's coolant going into this thing, so that's how it knows when it's hot or cold. So this can malfunction. It can get air trapped in it and malfunction. It can get malfunction because of the spring, and then you just need to buy a new one and bolt it on there. When it malfunctions, it can either just cause a high idle all the time. You can adjust your idle screw all you want, and it's not going to change it, or it will surge and go up and down and just have this revving thing. So one of the ways to bypass it is to plug this hole right here with something that's not going to get sucked into the engine. Either a piece of tape that gets folded up under here and then put the boot over it, or I've seen people put a cork in there. So if you stick that in there and then your surging problem goes away or your high idle goes away and you can finally use your idle adjustment screw, then it's probably the air idle control valve, but the question is there could be air in there. So that is another thing that is like temperature sensitive. When the engine is cold, before it's reached operating temperature, the computer uses a factory mapping for fuel based on the airflow meter, the volume that's going through there, and the temperature of it. Once it reaches operating temperature, it uses O2 sensor feedback to fine-tune the injector volume that's going in there. And there is always at least one O2 sensor on this, which is the upstream before the catalytic converter, and that's the O2 sensor that provides feedback and for fine-tuning of fuel trims. Some vehicles, depending on the destination market, Canada, California, and I think Oregon and a couple other ones, have a downstream O2 sensor, which is after the catalytic converter, and it's there for emissions purposes to verify that the catalytic converter is working correctly. And so it's not a performance issue, where the upstream O2 sensor is a performance issue. It is something that needs to be replaced eventually. These trucks are 30 years old. There's a lot of things that at this point in time it just needs to get done. So if you've never replaced that, and also depends on how your mileage, but still the age. If you rebuild your engine, replace the O2 sensor, you're going to get more out of that rebuild, because the 30-year-old O2 sensor that's been exposed to soot and heat, it's not going to be as accurate as a new one. And when you buy a new one, you buy a Denso. For any vehicle O2 sensor, I recommend buying the OEM sensor or from the company that makes the OEM sensor. And in the case of the Toyota, it's Denso that makes the O2 sensors. And so that's an important and underrated item. There also, make sure, because by 30 years, the wire clips and things are starting to fall off down there, and the wiring can start to fall down. And if the O2 sensor wiring falls down onto the exhaust and melts and grounds out, then it's going to burn the EFI fuse out. And you're going to stick another EFI fuse in there and it's going to burn out again. Or it'll be random. It's just like whenever it goes out and your truck's going to die on the side of the road or who knows where. So make sure that your O2 sensor wiring is not going to fall down on anything and won't get screwed up. If you replace the O2 sensor, buy the new nuts from Toyota. They're the same size nuts as for the air injection on the back side. So if you're going to end up going in there, all the nuts that are exposed to heat, all the nuts by now, a lot of them are rusting. So, but the ones that are exposed to heat, they just deteriorate more because they're going through so many of the heat cycles. All right, so the airflow meter measures the amount of airflow going in there, and if any air gets in here accidentally, it's called unmetered air, and then you end up getting a lean condition. And there's a couple of different ways that you can end up doing that. One is your hoses are cracked and it's lit a little bit in there, and then they can even just come off because they get cracked. The other thing, these are silicone replacements. The other thing that people do is they get rid of this hose and they stick an air breather on there, and that creates a vacuum leak. This is metered air, and it goes into the valve cover, and then this is the PCV valve, and that only lets air go this way, and it goes into the intake. So if you put a breather filter on here, you're letting in unmuted air and you're going to get a lean condition. And then the other thing that people do is they put a breather on each one, and you no longer have positive crankcase ventilation, you have static crankcase ventilation. And when the point of this, I mean, part of it is you got to deal with the mess that's going to end up coming out of here somewhere. If you put those breathers on there, you're going to create a mess. But part of the purpose of this is to get fresh air in there and get the blow-by gases out of there, because there's always going to be gases going past the rings in there, and you don't want that. You want to minimize how much of that is going to mix in with the oil. So when you put two breather filters on there, you're not getting the air out of there, you're not getting the blow-by gases out of there as well as you could with something like this. People do it because it looks cool. If you want to make it look cool, you get an oil catch can. And what that does, oil mist comes out of here and ends up making a mess on the inside of this. So an oil catch can catches the oil into a can and eliminates that mess, and you have to dump it every once in a while. Manufacturers don't install oil catch cans because it would be an additional expense and it would be a maintenance item. So for them, it's easier to dump it into the intake. So when you look in the intake, there's going to be like an oily mess in here because it's just from the mist of the PCV. So that's another opportunity for a vacuum leak. The brake booster, the way that operates is there's a big diaphragm on there, and it's connected to this vacuum line. There's a check valve right here that only allows the air to go that way, and when you step on that on the brake, it opens up a valve that lets the vacuum in there. Actually, the vacuum is going that way. You step on it, and it pulls on the diaphragm and pulls the brake down. That's how the power brakes work. So that diaphragm can end up leaking, and then what happens is you step on the brake, and it creates a vacuum leak going into here, and that's when you might get some stumbling, or you might get the surging effect. So that's something else to look out for. The way you test that is you use a vacuum gauge. They come with adapters, and take this hose off of there, stick it on there, you create a vacuum, and then have someone step on the brake, and when they step on the brake, if it loses the vacuum, then the diaphragm is bad. So, let's see. The idle adjustment screw right here, there's an O-ring inside there, and it gets old and it's cracked, and if it's 30 years old, it probably needs to be replaced right now. And another reason you want to replace it right now is because what happens is that screw vibrates out of there, falls out on the road somewhere, and then it creates a real big vacuum leak. And then you discover it, and then you got to go buy one of these screws or find something, and I've seen people just stick things in the hole. So at the end of this video, I'm going to show you some sizes of O-rings that you can either buy them from the dealer or just from like eBay or something like that, and based on the specifications. So you definitely want to replace that. Down underneath the intake is the pair, the pulsed air intake reed, and that's what's connected to this. There's a brown or a black canister like thing that is just an air baffle is what it is. So what that does, that's controlled by one of these vacuum switching valves. All these four things are VSVs. You apply electricity to them and it allows air to go through a vacuum. Then that's how things are controlled. So the computer turns on, flips that thing, and then that allows the pair down below to open up. What it's doing is it's putting fresh air into the exhaust so that the catalytic converter has some oxygen to burn up the unburnt fuel. Otherwise, it goes through there. So the catalytic converter is really hot, and the objective is to burn up the unburnt fuel, and it needs some oxygen to do that. So the pair allows air to go into the exhaust. It uses a Venturi-like effect. It's sucking on it, going out, and then so that's how that works. The reason I'm really bringing this up is that this hose here, because I have an aftermarket intake, it is coming from on the other side of the airflow meter, so it is unmetered air, which is what it should be. There are people that sell kits on eBay for the cold air intakes where it has the pair going into this tube, and that turns it into metered air, and it's going to end up making you go for a rich condition. So don't use that. If you buy that kit, all you really need to do on the baffle down here, put a breather down there. All this needs is fresh air that's clean. So and they put it on there to do double duty, using that air filter for it. So you could actually, I could eliminate this hose by just putting a breather on this little thing down here. Let's see. The air conditioning, if you have air conditioning, it idles up. It should idle, put the idle up. And the way it does that is, it originates right here. This is the screw that adjusts, that sets the idle when the air conditioning is on. And this gray VSV is what activates it. So you hit the button on the dash, it turns this thing on, and then it's allowing air to bypass to increase the idle to handle the higher load of the air conditioner when you're sitting at idle at a stoplight. But this is what adjusts that idle, or the additional amount of air. So if it's not idling up, for one, when you turn on the air conditioner, you should hear that click or feel it click. And then this is what's setting the speed. The power steering also has an idle up. If you don't have air conditioning, that means you don't have this device, and you're just going to have these two hoses. It would go from, it would go from here to there instead of going from there to there. The fuel pump is in the gas tank, and the gas in the tank helps cool the pump. So you shouldn't make a habit of riding on empty all the time or near empty. You're better off with more gas in the tank. The two things that activate the fuel pump are when you turn the key and activate the starter, then the fuel pump relay will activate the fuel pump. And the other thing is the airflow meter door. When you push on that is when you should hear the fuel pump run. Some people expect to hear it when you turn the key on. Older cars used to do that, but they would feed a fire, whereas this design is a little bit better than that. So what happens is, while the airflow meter door is open, the fuel pump is just running all the time. And then on the end of the fuel rail, there's a fuel pressure regulator that relieves the excess pressure. And what it does, there's a return line along the firewall, and it sends it back. If you ever needed to fill up a gas tank or empty your gas tank out of here, fill up a portable bottle, you could take that return line off, stick the hose into it, and activate the fuel pump, and then it would fill up your container with the gas tank. So that's one way to empty the gas tank. There are, inside the diagnostics box, there are some connections that you can use to hotwire the fuel pump. But if you're troubleshooting the system, you're best off pushing on the door, because you're testing part of that system, that thing is activating the relay, because that could be the source of a problem. Let's see here. If the fuel pressure regulator fails, you'll often get like a rich condition for a couple of reasons. So there's a hose on the fuel pressure regulator, or a vacuum line, that's hooked up to the throttle body, and what it's doing is it's compensating for the pressure differences inside of here. So inside the plenum or in the intake, the pressure is going to change different times, because like if you let your foot off the gas, and especially if you're in gear, there's going to be a high vacuum situation. The butterfly valve is closed, the pistons are, you can use the pistons to slow down the car, so it's sucking and creating a vacuum. And so you need to compensate on the fuel injectors, the amount of fuel going in there, because when you activate them, the vacuum in here will be sucking fuel out of them. So the fuel pressure regulator compensates for that. And so like while you're driving, the pressure of the fuel rail is going to vary at times because of that compensating it for it. And that's what that vacuum line from the fuel pressure regulator hose goes and then comes up to here. That's what that's for. It's just to compensate for the different pressures, because you can't just put it at a set PSI relative to the outside ambient pressure. You need it for the pressure inside. That's what that and some people eliminate that, which is not a good idea. You're screwing with things. If the fuel pressure regulator fails, one of the things that can happen is that, so there's a diaphragm in it, and there's a diaphragm, there's a spring, and that's what the tension is it's pushing against. If that diaphragm, similar to the diaphragm in the brake booster, fails, gas can go through that diaphragm and then get sucked in, and you'll end up getting more gas into your engine through one of the vacuum lines, because that diaphragm on the fuel pressure regulator is breached. And it's also going to keep the fuel pressure, the rail, at a higher pressure, because that diaphragm isn't there to lift up and open up the relief hole to when there's excess pressure. So you definitely get a real rich condition if your fuel pressure regulator fails through 2 points in there. All right, so injectors. The injectors are a maintenance item. They get dirty. They have a bad spray. They're not running like they did 30 years ago. They leak. They'll leak between cycles, and they'll leak when you turn the engine off. So if you haven't had your injectors cleaned by now, it would be a real good investment. It costs a little over $100, $125. It's probably gone up a little bit now. They fit into a post office priority mail box overnight, and that's how I've always dealt with it. So I don't have to drive anywhere, and then that's how they send them back in the small priority mailbox thing. And so I want to say it's I'll put the information in the places in Torrance. There's also an injectors master's guide. There's a whole bunch of people. It's actually really common, especially in marine industry. So any large city that you're in, if you search for like fuel injector cleaner service, you'll probably find somebody that does it. If not, you mail it off. But that will give you better gas mileage, give you more horsepower, and possibly, if you're not passing emissions, get you past emissions. That might be the cause of a failure. It's a real good investment after 20, 30 years. They should really be done sooner than that, I think. The injector wiring in here, one possible point of failure, if you're not getting a pulse on your injectors, where the wiring goes back, it comes together in a cluster and it's all crimped together. And some people have had a bad connection there. And you would, like I said, you do this through troubleshooting, and just you would not be getting an electrical pulse at the injector, and that's when you kind of work backwards to the ECU. It would either be between down there and here, and in between those 2 points, that is the most common failure point. All right, EGR, exhaust gas recirculation. What it does is, on the other side where the exhaust is at, it takes exhaust and runs it on the back side of the head across the EGR cooler plate just to cool it down a little bit. Comes through this is the modulator, and it comes into here. The purpose of it is to put some gas into the intake that doesn't have any oxygen in it and is effectively inert at this point in time after it came out. So it lowers engine temperatures, the combustion temperatures, and it lowers emissions, some piece of emissions. And so what it comes in here, this temperature sensor is only on a California model. So that's where it comes in, and then the exhaust, it's coming across here and then gets dropped into there. And that's why on the back side of the throttle body, it's full of carbon buildup. The EGR should only open up when the engine is hot and when it's under load. And it shouldn't open up when it's cold or when it's idling or when you're starting up. And there's a valve that does that, and as you can imagine, there's exhaust going through there, and that thing can end up getting stuck. I've never had a problem with it, but if it can get stuck, so if it's stuck like open, for instance, you might have some problems at lower RPMs at your like idling, because it's letting in, in excess of unmetered air. All right, talk about the exhaust a little bit. The nuts and studs wear, rust down, and that can cause loosening. I had a persistent problem with it, and had mechanics saying, "Oh, you need to spray copper coat on there." Well, this is what they were doing: spraying copper coat on there and getting a special exhaust gasket. But what it really came down to was just going to Toyota and buying the replacement nuts. And so, if you're planning to do any work on the exhaust, I would go to the dealer and buy those nuts before you start the job, because after 30 years they're going to need to be replaced with all the heat that they're subjected to. Exhaust efficiency. You don't want back pressure, and you don't want an open pipe. What you want is to maximize the velocity going out of the exhaust pipe while minimizing back pressure. That creates this gas column inertia that will suck the exhaust out of the next cylinder when the exhaust valve opens. And so you want to minimize the bends that are in the exhaust. On mine, right after the muffler, I just turned it down a little bit, down towards the ground, and that's where it ends, instead of going up over the axle and then bending to the side. So yeah, the whole back pressure thing was a myth. What it really needed is kind of like a chimney sucking air out of a fireplace. It's the same similar thing. So I believe that the consensus in the community for these is 2¼ inch exhaust pipes. So if you go bigger, you're ended up going slower, or you're going. The air velocity inside there is going slower, and so the faster that it's going, the more air it can suck out of the next cylinder, and that's how you gain power. Alright, so now on to some engine stuff. I was going through the OEM motor mounts. They would break. They just weren't strong enough, and literally the motor would be flopping around in there. I'd break one of them. And so then I went to the solid steel motor mounts that are like a hinge, basically, with a bolt on there and on both sides. And then it was just shaken up like it was going to self-destruct. And then, so what I did after that is I put a solid urethane bushing on that side, and they left the hinge one on this side, and the engine torque pushes it into that, and that reduced a lot of vibration. So I kind of got the best of both worlds. The solid hinge style is just, the motor's not really going to end up going anywhere off of that one, and the torque of the motor is pushing down into that. So let's see here. If you want to make your engine run a little bit better gas mileage and power, and is to adjust the valves. It's pretty simple. Lots of videos on the internet tell you how to do it. I think the easiest way is to do it cold at 7 and 11. You'll understand what I mean if you watch some of the other videos. Messing with it hot is a pain. Everybody seems to do it cold at 1/1000th under the hot spec. If you over tighten the valve cover, the rockers will hit it and you'll hear noise. The injectors on these are known for being loud. You're going to hear that on all the engines, but you shouldn't hear anything from here. If it's too loud, you can use a screwdriver, stick it on your ear, and stick the other end of it on the metal and use that as a stethoscope, and you can hear where the sound is coming from. So you don't want to over tighten the valve cover. It's real close in there. The back of that, there are half moons, so that allows a straight line bore on the cam. So there's a half moon cut out on the head and the front and the back. The motor is tilted, oil puddles back there, and that half moon is known for leaking oil. So I recommend putting RTV on the bottom half of that, or the curved part of the half moon in the back. When it leaks, it's kind of ambiguous, and it could look like it's coming from the rear main seal. It could be coming from the oil pan, because you just really can't see back there, and it could end up going along the motor through the bell housing, and yeah, so use some RTV on that. Timing chain guides, they're a plastic composite, and they're known for, they'll end up breaking, and debris will go down into the oil pan, and so then so the chain is going around. They're on these, supposed to be on these guides, and that's gone. So then it starts wearing into the timing cover gasket, or the timing cover, the aluminum timing cover, and if it does it long enough, it ends up wearing into a coolant jacket, water jacket there, and then it dumps water from the radiator down into your oil pan and then through the engine. So that's something that you want to check, and you want to replace that if depending on how many miles you got on the thing. And you can look at it, take the valve cover off, and look down in there. The other tool, a scope like this on Amazon you can pick up for under 30 bucks, and then view the image on a tablet. This thing is awesome. You can stick it down into a spark plug hole, but so you can, that way you can stick it down in there and inspect and see how much wear there is on there. This is a good investment. Let's see here. Anything, any shaft, all the shaft that goes through something is going to have a seal on it, and that seal is wearing into the metal shaft. And the older that the seal gets, the harder it gets, and the more it wears into that metal shaft. So you'll want to replace the seals that are on here if you get a chance. There's one on the harmonic balancer pulley down on the front there, and that pulley, the bolt is known for being difficult to get off. If you use an impact, the motor wants to turn just a little bit. When you're tearing an engine apart or rebuilding it, it's a lot easier because you can put a chain on the backside, and then that keeps the motor from moving at all. But if you use an impact, you're losing some of the force of the impact, because even with it in gear, it just it's moving a little bit. So use heat on that bolt if you need to get it off. That's one good piece of advice. But you should replace that seal that's on there, and if you're ever in the back, replace the rear main seal, same thing on the output. And then the transmission has an input and an output shaft seal, and those the same thing. They'll end up wearing into the metal. They get old, and the oil that you see that says for high mileage vehicles, it has additives in there to soften up those seals to reduce the likelihood of a leak. So that's what that high mileage aspect of those oils are, is because the seals that are going on there, they harden up. Let's see here. When you set the timing on the engine, you have to jump 2 connections in here, and TE and TE1, I can see them because they're the only ones that don't have grease. There's different things that you can do in here, but that's the only thing I ever do. So what that does is that turns off all of the adjustments and advances that the ECU or that the computer is putting on the timing. And so then you adjust it at 5 degrees, and then when you pull that wire out of there, it advances it and it does other things. But that's confused some people, that when they looked at the timing, it was just way off. But that jumper needs to be in there to set or check the timing. Let's see here. If you want more horsepower, one of the other things is rebuild the engine. I bought an engine from somebody who claimed to be a professional, and the piston pin retaining clip came out, and the piston pin ground into the cylinder, and yeah, he ended up not being a professional, or he ended up telling me that some apprentice built the motor, not him. That was like his way out of responsibility or what have you. But it's Quimera's in Moreno Valley. Don't buy it from him. So I finally decided I'm going to do it myself, and I have a PDF of the manual. It's all over the internet, of the Toyota Factory Service Manual, and I printed out the pages I needed, and I stepped through it and rebuilt the engine. And it runs great. I'm really happy with it. Ran into a couple of things along the way. So first I took the block in, had a re-sleeve, and then when I put the crank in, it wouldn't move smoothly. So there are thrust washers that keep the crank in position from going back and forth, essentially. And the journals that they sit in, they had been welded and machined down, but they hadn't been machined down enough. So that was this guy that I bought my engine from. So that was the second mistake that he made on that. And there was actually a problem with the head even before that. So that stumped me for a little while because just lack of expertise. But I did stop because I knew that there was a problem. I just couldn't identify what the problem was. Took it to the machine shop with the crankshaft, and they explained it to me. And so then they machined it to the appropriate thickness, and then the thrust washers fit in there, and it moved nicely. So if you do go to rebuild your engine, one is at every step, make sure it moves good, and because when you put the crankshaft in and you tighten it down, it should move good. When you put one piston in, it should move good, and the same thing each way along. And when you do, when you put the cam caps on, spin that around and make sure that it spins nicely without the rockers on there. And if you buy an aftermarket head from China, do not use the cam that comes with it. They're made out of butter and they'll get ground down. Transfer your cam from and your rockers. They're already matched and in good shape. Transfer them over to the new head. Long ago, I had a persistent. I was blowing head gaskets, and it was happening between 3 and 4, like in that little bridge narrow area there. And this is when I was having other people work on it, and it happened twice. And so then finally, I'm like, this is professional mechanics, and they couldn't figure it out. So I'm like, I'm going to do it myself. I can't do any work. So I did it myself in my driveway. And when I had the head off, I decided to run the bolts into all the holes with the head off. And what it turned out happening was one of the bolt holes between the 3 and the 4 had a bunch of carbon buildup in it, and so the bolt wouldn't thread down in there nicely. And it was, so when they were torquing it down, they were getting a torque value of the resistance, not the clamping pressure. So what I did, so there's something over there in that one bolt hole that it's probably got to do with the EGR channel that's going through there, but it's exposing that to like carbon buildup. So what I did was I took a tap of the right size, and then I put grease in the flutes of the tap and cleaned it out, and so the carbon buildup that was in there stuck to the grease, so it wouldn't fall down in the hole. Then after that, voila, my head gasket, blown head gasket problem disappeared. So if you go to work on it, run the bolts down through all the holes and make sure that they go in there good, because if there's any resistance, you're getting torquing resistance plus the clamping. You want to only measure clamping. There shouldn't be any twisting resistance from the threads. Let's see here. If you go to work on your truck, or especially something big like that, or take off the head, or you're going to rebuild it, Ziploc baggies, group the bolts, anything that doesn't go back into the holes that you took it out of easily, put them in Ziploc baggies and put a label on them. And then when you go to put some area back together, you just grab that baggie, and then it makes it really easy, and there's no confusion putting nuts and bolts in the wrong place. Take lots of pictures along the way. That should be obvious, but even you take a lot of pictures, and then there's something that you didn't get in there that you can't see very well because of either lighting or something was obstructing it, something along like that. When I rebuilt the engine, the only real special tools that I needed was the engine hoist, the engine stand, and then a piston ring filer. And I bought this one on Amazon. It worked well. It's kind of weird layout on the thing, because really you want the ring here so that when you're spinning this, the burrs are going in towards the piston and not out towards the cylinder wall. I'll put a picture in of that. And let's see here. The only other new thing to me when I went to do it was you need plastic gauge. Looks like dental floss, and I fell out. Looks like dental floss, and it's for measuring the clearance between all the bearings to make sure that your clearances are good. And then when you bolt everything down to torque to spec, and then you take it back off, and whatever the width is on here is what the clearance is. Other than that, I rebuilt the whole thing without any other special tools. It didn't take anything. It wasn't really it took time, but there wasn't any step that was especially difficult. There wasn't any little kind of mechanism or anything like that was tedious. The transmission on my motorcycle had more tedious little things in it than this engine does. Let's see here. All right, so if you go to work on this, there's a couple of hidden bolts on let's say you take the valve cover off, and the timing cover is right below the head, and there's a bolt that goes through the head and into the timing cover, and the top of that gets covered with oil, and so you don't see it there. So if you go to take the head off, you get it. That's the missing bolt that's hidden under the puddle of oil, and that's why it won't end up coming off. When you go to take off the intake, most of the bolts are all normal headed bolts. There's an Allen head bolt that's kind of hidden back down into a thing. So that's the hidden bolt on the intake that you need to know about. Okay, so a couple of things on the manual transmission. Things to inspect. The shifter there's a ball that the shifter rotates on, and it sits down in a seat that is conform to the ball, and that thing can get crushed. And so when it does, it becomes difficult to change gears. So yeah, there's that, and then down the end of the tip, there's a little rubber tip that goes on top of there. Those two things can get worn, and when they wear, it makes it difficult to shift. So that's something to inspect on that. On top of that, where it comes out of the transmission, there's another dust cover boot, and so look at that as well to see if it needs to get replaced. The mount, the transmission mount, I've had to replace on this already. It's a pretty easy fix, but it's like all those rubber things after 30 years, and especially if you off-road it, because it gets jostled around quite a bit. And then, what else? There is a hose for the clutch master cylinder that goes down to the slave, in between the body and to where it goes right at the clutch. There's a hose there, and that's something else that when I took the engine out, it needed to be replaced because it was dried and starting to crack on the outside. There are two different styles of that one. Got the wrong one the first time. So look at the ends and make sure that you get the one that's got the correct ends on it for yours. I don't know why there are two different styles. The clutch master and clutch slave, they're really inexpensive to buy. I should say really expensive. Like I think the slave was like $20. And then I think the master was like $40, and that's from Aisin, the original equipment manufacturer from Toyota. So when I had it ripped out, I replaced those and then gave them to a guy that's got a Toyota truck, my old ones. But so when you replace any of the components, but especially I think that clutch slave, if you replace that, you need to bench bleed it, which means get some hydraulic fluid in there. Typically close the plungers all the way and pour it in, and then let the plunger out to suck some of the fluid in there. And what I do with most of those things, and like if you replace a brake cylinder, is to shake it up and get all of the inside surfaces wet, because I have a theory that like a bubble of air will attach to some irregular shape that's in there, and just like a bubble on the side of a beer glass. And that's why sometimes people have problems after they replace the slave on these things, and they just keep bleeding, and then they finally get it. When I did it, I didn't have any problems because that's what I did. I filled it up as much as I could, but then just shake it around so that all the metal surfaces, it doesn't have an air bubble stuck to it that doesn't want to come out, because who knows what the inside shape of that thing was. And an air bubble can be stuck on it anywhere. If you got a lot of miles, it's probably time to replace your transmission fluid, and that's if you pull the seals off of the input and output shaft, you're going to lose some fluid. So that's something to do at the same time. The output shaft seal involves just taking the drive shaft out and kind of moving it to the side. Not a bad idea. After I changed it, it just sounded a lot better, and definitely it shifts better. It sounds different the way that it just sounds really good. And so I just imagine after hundreds of thousands of miles, it needed it. Let's see. The two-wheel drive transmission isn't very heavy. I've pulled it out. I used a transmission jack, but I didn't really need it. If you've got a friend to help you that's willing to do a little bit of work, you can do it without a transmission jack. Part of it, there's a cross member, and you stick the transmission up on that, so that's going to take some of the weight, and then you're lifting up the belt housing. It was a little easier with a transmission jack, not having to do that weight. But somebody that is willing to do a little labor, not with a two-wheel drive. It's a pretty light transmission. Air conditioning. The key to killer air conditioning is an electric fan. the stock fan just doesn't move enough air. I replaced my fan with a fan out of a 1990 to a 1995 Ford Taurus SHO that just sucks a phenomenal amount of air across the radiator and it's just into the engine compartment that the other fan never ever did. It just wouldn't have that capability. So it fits up on the radiator almost perfectly. It's shy over on the other side, maybe an inch, so I had to weld a couple little brackets to put it on there. But other than that, the top and the bottom, this side it's just screwed in straight from the plastic shroud over. This is a 3-core radiator, which pushed it back a little bit, so you take off the clutch and everything like that. I spent a lot of time out in the desert in California, and it gets really hot, like, I mean, regularly over 110 degrees and sometimes up 120 degrees, and it's really dry, with like 10% or less, and the dry weather dry air doesn't transfer heat as well, where like a higher humidity environment is going to transfer more heat with the moisture flowing through there. So the stock fan wasn't cutting it. So I put the electric fan on there. I can now stop my truck, leave the engine running with the air conditioning on, and it doesn't overheat, and it just blows out ice cold air the whole time, which is awesome. And there was no chance I would be able to do that. I mean, if I stopped and left the air conditioner going, because for people that don't know, the condenser is right here, and so you turn the air conditioner on, then all of a sudden that's creating heat, and so it's sucking the heat from the condenser into the radiator, and that's why turning on the air conditioner will make your car overheat a lot of times. But I haven't had a problem with that, and I'll put pictures and some info up for that. Let's see. The evaporator core box is below the glove box, and it fills up with dirt and debris that comes in through the cowl. And when I took it out, it's like the bottom of the box is just full of sand. So once again, going out of the desert, you can get in dust storms and stuff like that. But there's no filter on these things, and there was a lot of leaves in there too. And the other thing related to that, if you take off the cowl and go down in there, there's dirt and debris stuck in there, and it keeps water from draining out, because it's supposed to drain out underneath the fenders, and it can trap water and cause rusting along that. I wouldn't call it the firewall, I guess, but the rusting along that wall. And so if you have a leak inside your cab, that's a possible source. And it's not a bad thing to do. Take this thing out and clean that out of there. Like I said, I had a bunch of sand and leaves and stuff like that, and that's and it was causing rusting over there. So I converted this over to R134A. There's a Toyota technical service bulletin that describes how to do it. The older refrigerant uses mineral oil as a lubricant. The R134A uses PAG oil, which is a synthetic, as a lubricant. The TSB says you can leave the mineral oil in there. There's a product called AC Flush that you can use to flush some of the lines. So I redid the AC, and there's a whole bunch of O-rings, and that's what leaks, and that's what you really need to fix. And at this point in time, it's not a bad idea. A lot of it is under the grill, which is pretty easy to get to. Over on the other side, there's the air dryer. It's a little can the size of a soda can, and if you lose your refrigerant and everything, and it's exposed to the outside air, especially if you get an accident, that air dryer needs to be replaced. It's only about $20. So if you rebuild your system to get it going, replace the air dryer. The TSB has the amount of refrigerant and lubrication oil for your vehicle. You want to use the exact amount of refrigerant. Putting in extra refrigerant is not going to make your truck extra cold. And to do that, to fill it, it's best you have a scale, and that's how you determine how much you're putting in. You just put the exact amount in. After you put everything back together, you have to suck the air out of there with a vacuum pump to evacuate the system and get any moisture out of there, anything. And so it's just there's nothing in there. So you want to put in refrigerant. Those aren't too expensive, and then the vacuum gauge set. The tools, if you take the time to learn how to do it, the tools are cheaper than to take it in to pay somebody to do it. So you end up with the tools. So yeah, air conditioning works great now. Let's see what else. You put on some little adapters to convert it over to quick release. The old style is like a thread-on, and I use a product called Nylog on all the O-rings that helps seal them, and it's compatible with the refrigerant. The other thing is, if you have a leak and you're trying to trace it down, you use a UV dye, either in the oil. So if you put your system back together, or you convert over to R134A, you can get PAG oil with a UV dye in it and just use that. So then if it does leak, you're already ready for it, and you use a black light to go around and search to see where it happened. The UV dye will come out wherever the leak is, and then you go around with black light and you can find it, and it does work. Brakes, hydraulic fluid absorbs moisture from the air, and so you need to change your brake fluid. People always post things in groups and say, take a picture of their engine, and they say, what mod should I do to make this thing faster? And their brake fluid is as black as the booster. You should flush them out. It's been a couple years since I've done mine, and you can see the difference in color in the hydraulic fluid, and so I need to bleed my hydraulic fluid, and it's possible that like the brake lines on the inside are where the origin of that is, and that's what ends up happening is you get moisture in there and it gets all dirty, and then it destroys your brake system from the inside out, and it's a pretty easy thing to do. There's DOT3 fluid is the original fluid for this car. And then they came out with newer specifications, and each one up has a higher boiling point, and then that's when your brakes fade. And there's a boiling point like right out of the bottle, and there's a boiling point after it's been sitting in here and absorbing moisture. It goes down. So each step up between DOT3, 4, and 5.1 can handle more heat. DOT3 and 4 fluids are really close in price, so don't even waste your time with DOT3 anymore. You use DOT4 at a minimum, and 5.1 if your budget can handle it. Let's see. There's a couple different ways to bleed the system. I've always been a fan of the gravity bleed, which is you just hook this cup there, and you open up the valve, and you walk away and let it drip, and just make sure that the reservoir doesn't run dry. And a lot of times when you've got air trapped in the system, this is a really good way to get it out. Because like there's another way, which is to stick this vacuum pump on here and suck it out. And then there's also pressure bleeding. But I believe that like using this here, it's like pulling the air apart, and it's not as effective as just walking away, go have a beer, whatever you do in your leisure, and then come back and fill it up. There's another product that's out now called speed bleeders or quick bleeders. There's a one-way valve in there, and then you hook the cup up to capture everything, but then you just go inside in your truck or your car, and then you pump on the pump, and it goes out. And so this is a real good way if you're alone, or it's just a lot faster than having another person inside saying pump and sitting there going back and forth with a wrench. Let's see. In the back of the truck, there is a load sensing proportioning valve, LSPV, and there's a rod going down to the axle And what it does is, when depending on the load on the truck, this valve moves and gives you more brakes. So if the tailgate is high, then it's not going to apply as much brakes relative to the front. And if you've got a lot more weight in the back, it's going to give you more brakes in the rear. And some people just get rid of it. Some people put in, there's it's like Willwood Brakes makes a proportioning valve that you can adjust yourself to replace that unit, because that ends up going bad potentially, and that's, I honestly think that part of it is just crappy fluid in there, destroying it from the inside. Suspension to steering. Change your power steering fluid. It probably needs it if you've never done it. Just like the brake fluid, it's going to make your system last a lot longer. And the way you do that, you drain as much as you can out of it. And then the way you bleed this system is actually pretty easy. Jack up the front end to get some weight off the wheels, and then you slowly move the steering wheel from one end to the other, back and forth, and that works the air out, and then make sure that the reservoir doesn't run dry. And yeah, that's really easy. And power steering gets hot, and it can destroy the fluid. So if you've never done it, and once again, it's like, yeah, it's just a maintenance item that's overdue for 30-year-old vehicles. The control arm bushings and the spring bushings, they wear out. And like in the rear on my springs, this was years ago, they wore out. And I would be driving down the highway, and tracking would be different depending on if I had my foot on the gas or if I take off the gas. It would just go, because the back end was kind of shifting, and it was because the bushings on the leaf springs were worn out. Front wears out too. I think even more so on this side because it's close to the exhaust from the heat. The idler arm has a bushing in the side of it that can be replaced. So if it's not bent, you can simply replace that bushing. That's a good one. Steering wheel has a rag joint that gets old and cracked. They're available on Rock Auto. There's also, if you're ended up taking that apart, there's also a seal that goes around the shaft between on the firewall to keep gas and smells and stuff out. So look at that, see if it needs it if you're taking out that rag joint. Alright, so next I'm going to talk a little bit about electrical. There are these flat panel LEDs that work great for the dome lights on the interior. All the light is projected down. I don't have any part numbers or links for you because the technology constantly changes and it would end up getting bad sooner or later. What you need to do, and this is probably from my RV, what you need to do is measure the inside of it and then search eBay or Amazon. And they come with these adapters. I think it's a festoon, and a little springy thing goes in there. They come with a bunch of adapters, but this is the one that you're going to want. And then plug that in, and that light just lights up the inside of the interior perfectly. I went with, in the rear, I still have the OEM lenses. What I did was I got the LED bulbs that are colored to the light of the lens. So they're red, and they're amber, and then of course white. It makes it a very vibrant red and a very vibrant amber, instead of a white light, simply depending on the color of the lens. It looks really good. Don't have any pictures of it for you, but it's an idea. I don't have my stock bumper on here. I've got an aftermarket one that a friend built, and so then, and the turn signals are in the bumper, so you need to come up with a solution for that. So I use these side marker lights that are LED, and then put them into the grill. The grill tapers in, so you need to mount it on like a 3/8 inch or a 1/2 inch piece of something. Plastic is what I use. And then that's it. Works great. If you do change over to LEDs, on your turn signals, you need to get an electronic flasher, and I'll put a picture of it in here. Broken connectors. A lot of these connectors break, the wires break because they're really thin. You can get replacement connectors on Rock Auto, Amazon, eBay. Search for like 22R or 22R-E and the connector you're looking for, and also search for just like Google Images, and then you might find one there because you'll spot what you need. Those are really common thing to break because that plastic just gets real. The alternator has replaceable brushes, so that's something that if you're still on your OEM alternator, would be a bad idea to just replace those brushes. It's really inexpensive and easy. Grounds are sometimes an issue for people, especially in snowy states where you've got a lot more rust. So you want to make sure that you have all your grounds good. The big one is going from a cable going from negative down to the motor mount down below. That's what your starter relies on. If you're having starter problems, like if you get a click but the starter doesn't engage, it might be a bad connection on one of the thicker cables that are going down there. I replaced my positive cable to the starter. The original one was actually kind of thin and just starting to break. So I got a real thick one. You can have cables made on eBay to length. You want to get crimped connectors, not soldered. Solder melts under heat. So you have the main ground going to the frame, down to the motor mount and the engine, which is the starter relies on. There's also a small one right here that goes from the battery to the body. Then there's one that seems to disappear on a lot of people. It goes from the body, the firewall back there, to actually right here, to the head. And then there's another one that's part of the wiring harness that goes to the EFI right here. And then there's another ground in the wiring harness that I believe is technically for the alternator, but it's usually connected onto the power steering bracket. It's part of the wiring harness. It's a white wire. So those are your grounds. If you're going to buy parts, ASIN and Denso are the OEM manufacturers for a lot of parts for these trucks, and they have aftermarket parts available, and they're reasonably priced. ASIN makes the hydraulics, clutch master and brake master, clutch slave, clutch itself, and oil pump, water pump. Denso makes the fuel pump, the starter, the O2 sensors, the injectors, the air conditioning compressor, the throttle position sensor, which I haven't really touched on much. This needs to be adjusted to perfection within less than a millimeter's turn to get it exact. There are instructions in the manual and out on various websites and YouTube videos that tell you how to adjust that. If you're having problems, it can cause a variety of different problems. And one of the things that happens is that the mechanism that's in there gets gummed up and doesn't return, so it gets stuck. But it can be tested through by taking off the electrical connector and using a multimeter. Always test parts before you replace them. And the screws that are on there are not Phillips head screws. They're JIS specification, which I'll get into now, I suppose. The JIS is Japan Industrial Standards, and all of the bolts and nuts and bolts and hardware on here are all JIS hardware. So you can buy them aftermarket, Amazon, eBay, just regular finding websites. Search for JIS and then the size that you're looking for. All the bolts on here, there are no 13 millimeter bolts. I think I found one and it was supposed to be, and it was just due to constraints and something specialized, and it wasn't even just a normal headed bolt. So there should only be like 12s and 14s. There shouldn't be finding 13 millimeter heads on here. They should all be the reduced head, which is the 12 millimeter. There are This is a push mount zip tie. These are really good for keeping your wiring from falling down onto things. When I rebuilt my engine, when I took everything apart, it took a while, I measured all of the nuts and bolts and I made a spreadsheet. It's out on a bunch of different Facebook pages, groups rather, in the files section. And so there's two columns in there. One is the location, and that's what the thing is getting bolted onto. And then the other column is the description, and that's what's getting bolted on. If you want to make your own kit, you can put it together. You can see in there, see the totals, and see what all the sizes are to make your own kit. Okay, now I'm going to talk about some of the modifications that I've done to my truck. I used off-roading. I broke a lot of things, and then finally broke down and had the whole front end suspension, the steering, all rebuilt custom by the truck shop in San Diego. They're in Miramar, and they did a really good job. I haven't broken anything since. It uses Heims instead of ball joints. This is a shock tower brace. It keeps the shock towers from pushing in. Shock towers, because there's taller shocks now, they had to cut into the fender to make room for it. Makes the fuel filter changes a lot easier. So the brace also gives you a place to mount the reservoirs. The reservoirs help you manage the heat by adding capacity. There are valves, shock valves inside the shocks, and that's what determines the shock rate. And the gas going through there heats up because it's restricted. So one of the ways you deal with that is to put a reservoir on there to increase capacity. Another way is to put a larger orifice in there and then get two shocks and to increase it that way. Front end's got the weight of the engine, so it's a lot more critical than the back end. You got the front end just bouncing up and down, up and down. Back end's empty truck bed and a spare tire. I've got just a single shock on both sides back there. Also have a spindle lift from FabTech, and that was like a 2-inch lift. They don't make those anymore, unfortunately. Torsion bars, 25 millimeter swayaways instead of 23. I think you really need it for the extra weight of the wheels, and definitely for just resistance coming down sometimes. In the back, I lifted it with a shackle lift, which is a real inexpensive way to lift the back end. This one is from FabTech. They don't make them anymore, but they're not very complex. They're something that can be fabricated pretty easily. The other thing I did was leaf springs. Initially, I had taken the original OEM leaf springs, had them re-arced, and then had some leaves added to it. And that lasted for probably a decade or so. And then I broke one of the leaves. And so I took it to a spring shop. Side note on spring shops, there are tons of them across the United States, everywhere. A lot of them do work on industrial stuff because that's where the biggest need is, but they'll also do custom work on trucks and cars, and they've got the materials to do it. So took it to a truck shop or a spring shop rather, and had them build a custom pack. What you really want is a lot of thin leaves. The thinner leaves allow better flex. The thicker leaves, if you take a thick piece of metal and you bend it back and forth enough times, it's going to break, or something thinner is going to be able to continue to flex repeatedly without breaking. So that's what happened with my stock leaves. So you get a thinner leaf and you get more of them, and then you get more progression out of it, so that initially it's soft, and the further that you go down, the more resistance that there is. And that way you get a better ride. You really want it soft, but when you're coming down off of the ground, you need it firm at some point in time, so you just progressively get to that point. The four-wheel drive trucks are known for having stiff rides. It's not your shocks, it's the springs. If you wanted to make your ride be a lot smoother, you get some like a custom leaf pack that has progression, and because the 4-wheel drives are really they are built to handle a load, and not everybody carries a load. So that's one way to soften up your ride. I put a limited slip differential in this, TRD. Best deal I ever got off of eBay, $200, brand new in the box, and it's great. I get the wheel that's slipping will get 100% of the power, and then the wheel that has traction will get 80%, is the way that it's described. And allows me to go off-road into the sand, air down, if you don't know that for off-roading. Let air pressure out of your tires down like 15 pounds, and you'll get a larger footprint, and it'll keep you from sinking into the sand because the aired up tires just cut right into it. So it's great off-road now. The travel helps a lot because you're keeping the wheels on the ground. The weight's in the front usually wins. It's usually the back end that has the wheel off of the ground because of that. So if you have more travel, you can keep your wheels on the ground, and also maintaining momentum helps. The limited slip differential is great on the highway and in the rain. I can accelerate out into a turn in the rain and just have complete control and no uncontrolled slippage or anything like that. It really added to it was both better on the street and off road, both cases. I have a DOA cam in it that shifts the power band. I think it starts at about 2,500 and then goes up to about 55, and it definitely has more power to it, less on the low end, a little bit rougher on the idle, but it's I like it much better than the stock cam. Had a roll cage installed by Auto Power in San Diego. They make kits that you can order for cars and bolt them in yourself and weld them in yourself, but they don't make them for trucks. But I had to make a custom roll cage for my truck, and it fits just perfectly snug up against the body, which is where you want it to be to reinforce the body. In the back, they tied it into the pillar that has the bolt for the seat belt on it. So it ties it into that. That was a real nice job. They also did some cab mounts on this because the body mounts were underneath the back storage compartment, were caving in from off-roading and just coming down a little bit hard. So they did some new mounts that go onto the frame and basically sandwiched two pieces of steel together with the body in the middle of it, and that's how they attach it to the body and spread all the stress out to a larger area. And instead of like trying to weld to the body, they just sandwiched it. Had another friend of mine put these two pieces of steel on the frame to protect the catalytic converter. I high centered once and it crushed the exhaust. The catalytic converter came out of it fine, but the exhaust just got crushed. So put those two pieces of steel on there so that that doesn't happen again. We'll hit the steel before I hit the catalytic converter, or at least it went all the way up there. Also, rear bumper, had that made by Auto Power. I told them make something creative that looks good and has a receiver hitch, and I really like the design that they came up with. It looks great. It's got a place to step onto it. The way that center is going out, when you're parking, it's not really in the way like you're going to hit somebody in much, because you're going in at an angle if you're parallel parking. Real nice design on that, and it's strong. Tire mount, I needed a full-size spare tire, so I put it in the bed in the back corner. 31-inch tire, fits perfectly to half of the bed, and It's a real simple design, drilled in 2 holes into the truck bed, and then with long bolts and a piece of steel to keep welded to those bolts to keep them from moving around when I go to put the jig into place, and then just your standard security lug nuts for your tires. And so after like 10 years or so, now the bed is starting, probably longer than that, the bed is bending because of just from off-roading and stuff like that. So I'm doing this again. I'm putting in this reinforcement bar. That's the width of the tire so that it's going to pull up on the tire from the underside essentially. And so I needed a new jig that's got longer bolts. Resources. Things that will help you when you're working on the truck or your engine. The first one is the factory service manual. There is a PDF of the factory service manual for a 1993 Toyota truck that's out in a whole bunch of groups on Facebook. I originally found it by searching Google and search for factory service manual, the year of my truck, and include a PDF in there and found it. The version that's out there is it's a digital version, so it's searchable. It's not an image, and a lot of what's in there is going to cross over to other years. And it's got all the troubleshooting procedures. If you were to take your vehicle to the dealer, those are the procedures that they would follow. If you're getting a check engine light, and it'll tell you how to jump the wires to get the codes to read out on the dash, and then you can read in there and see what the procedure is to resolve that trouble coded condition. It's a great resource for that, and it just details out a lot of stuff. There's also specifications in there, what fluids you should use, how much fluid you're going to need for something. And you can, in Adobe Reader, you can add notes into your version of this file, which is really helpful to be able to mark it up like that. YouTube videos are a great resource. There's a video out there for each individual thing that you want to do to this engine. When I rebuilt it, I referenced a video that somebody else had made. If you need to adjust the TPS, there's a video for that. If you need to do the timing, there's a video for that. If you need to troubleshoot your EGR, there's a video for that. So it's an excellent resource. Parts suppliers have documents, web pages, and their own videos detailing procedures. They want you to get the right part. So there's actually parts suppliers that have the TPS procedures for that. I made this engine components diagram a couple years ago just to call out all of the different components that are on there, because you look at stuff and you don't know what's what. There's higher resolution version of it out on social media, but you can see what it is from here. I also made this vacuum line diagram how-to, and on the newer versions of these engines, there's a tube rail that goes down there, and it's kind of ambiguous when it gets to the back on which is the top and which is the bottom. So when I had pulled the thing out, I made this diagram. You're going to need, your hood should have the vacuum diagram for your vehicle. If it doesn't, once again, search for like the terms of your year and your vehicle, and then like look in Google Images to find it, or in some of the groups. The gist of it is kind of the same. Mine's a later vehicle, and it's California, so it's got like all the bells and whistles that are on there. Any earlier vehicles are going to be very similar, but they might be scaled down with less tubing. If you do get any of that wrong, you can screw up the performance of your vehicle just because things, the EGR might be activating when it shouldn't activate because something isn't hooked up right. So yeah, so that's what that chart's for. I also measured the O-ring sizes on this, and this is a little chart that I made. And then there's Toyota part numbers in there, and then there's another JS specification number on one of the O-rings. So you can order those from anybody based off of those dimensions. Okay, so now I'm going to talk about some tools and supplies. This is Metal Prep and Clean. You can find it in the cleaning section of the paint department at Home Depot, Lowe's, or hardware stores. It's great for removing rust. Actually, what it does is it converts rust to a black oxide. You might be familiar with like sockets that are black oxide, or sometimes they do it to guns. There's different things that they do to guns, which is metal that is going to be treated but not painted, usually oiled to keep it from rusting. So it'll convert rust to a black oxide as long as it can. The rust isn't too thick, then the liquid can actually penetrate it and get down in there. You treat bare metal with this to passivate it, which inhibits oxidation. That's why they call it the metal prep portion of it. It's a liquid, so it's going to drip off. I use paper towels to hold it on to a surface and to keep the surface wet. After it dries, it usually leaves like a white residue, so you want to rinse it off before it dries. So just keep it wet. The product is made of phosphoric acid, which is used in a lot of rust conversion products and prevention products, and one of them being navel jelly. Same product in a gel form, so that it lasts longer before it dries up. There's a lot of product for removing rust in here. You get the most bang for your buck out of this. This is less than $20. This bottle costs about $10. You get a lot out of that. You don't want to get any of the phosphoric acid based products on zinc, which is the coating that you put on nuts and bolts. It will remove that really fast. You also probably don't want to get it on concrete because it will etch concrete. That's one of its other uses, is to etch concrete before you adhere something down to it. Let's see here. Phosphoric acid is what they put in Coca-Cola to give it a tangy bite, that sourness to offset the sweet, and it's what they put in there to also eat your teeth. People always say use Coca-Cola to remove rust. This is the product that they put in small amounts in Coca-Cola that will remove rust, and so this is the more potent version that'll do it a lot better than using Coca-Cola. The other product that I use is Evapo-Rust. This is a lot milder. It is friendly with zinc and some other metal coatings. It's not an acid, so it's not going to eat stuff off. It's a bit more expensive just as far as how much rust you can remove with the product. These two products cost roughly the same, but you're going to be able to remove a lot more rust with the metal prep. The other alternative, or a good choice for removing rust, is a sandblaster, and I couldn't find mine. I don't know where it's at. The sandblaster itself is really inexpensive, but you need an air compressor with a lot of air volume to use one, because you're just opening the trigger and letting it go. Sandblasting does a great job of just removing everything that's just the rust and leaving the bare metal, and it's in a condition that's just ready to paint. And it really is the best solution in most cases, but it's not always the easiest solution. It's you got to have, like I said, you got to have an air compressor, but you also have to deal with the sand and the mess. Sandblasting is a great method. So after you remove rust or treat it, turn it to black oxide, one option here is to just put a thick oil on it. This is one product. There are a lot of products that are out there. Something like WD-40 is really thin and it comes off really easy, where these thicker oils will stick and stay longer. There are videos on YouTube about them, of course. One of them I watched, the guy put the product on the bottom of his vehicle, ran it for a year. He lives in a state where they put salt on the roads, and then you could see on the drive shaft, one side of it didn't have rust because that's what got the oil, and the other side that didn't get hit with oil had rust on it. So they are effective products. Some other ones have like a long hose or a tube on here with a spray nozzle on the end that goes out to the sides, and you put it on the inside of your frame and you drag it through there while you are pulling on the trigger. That's a real good product. Another thing is a wiring loom. I use this on the underside where the wires are run along the tailgate, and then I've got a lighting for a little trailer, and then all that. I stuck all the wiring in the wiring loom and then zip tied it up in there. They put tape around there, and some of the stuff, like I said earlier, the trucks are 30 years old, so a lot of the things that are in there are deteriorating. So that's a good way to protect the wiring. This is a good old-fashioned impact driver, and the way it works, this one has a 3/8 drive. You can buy them with a 1/2-inch drive. This is an adapter to put in these screw bits, and when you hit it, you hold it down on the fastener that you're trying to remove, and you're kind of twisting it in the direction that you want to go. And when you hit it with the hammer, it's like there's a wedge in there, and it twists just a little bit. And the impact of hitting it with a hammer keeps the bit or the socket that you put on there, or even like an Allen head socket to keep it inside that hole. And the impact of the hammer helps loosen the bolt. So this is like a very underrated product. Everybody's all into electric tools that are all really expensive, but there are a lot of cases where this is going to be more effective than your $200 or $300 impact because of that actual hammering action that's going on there. Vernier caliper. This is just handy to have. I wish I'd bought more of these because I spent, I think, $1.50 or $2 for this thing, and they're just handy to have around anytime you need to measure anything. It doesn't have to be a nut or bolt. It could just be like trying to get measure your lights for LED lighting to see what's going to fit inside your dome light. They're really accurate and handy to have around. They are the little brother to the digital caliper, which is overkill in a lot of cases. You don't like just to measure nuts and bolts, the size of them. This is sufficient. You don't necessarily need to spend big bucks for it. And then last thing is a machinist straight edge. When you work on your head, take the head off, and you need it to make sure that the block is straight or the head is straight. You don't use a yardstick. You need to have a machinist straight edge that is perfectly straight, and you put it across the surface in a bunch of different directions and try to jam a feeler gauge under there, and then you can measure if it's straight or if it's warped or you need to get it decked. All right, finally time to wrap this video up. A couple of things I forgot. The Eiler Proly bearings can be replaced. There's a part number on them. The part numbers are specific to manufacturers, so you might need to do a little conversion there. You want a bearing that's got contact seals on both sides. Some bearings don't even have seals on one side because they're meant to be up in something that's lubricating them. Yeah, you want them on both sides, and I believe that so that the part number on bearings, the end of it often are the type of seals. And I believe what you want is a 2RS. Brake rotors. I believe that the drilled rotors are pointless on these trucks, and they could actually make the braking worse. There are videos on the internet where they've tested slotted and drilled and solid rotors, and the drilled rotors reduce mass, which increases the temperature of the mass that remains. So they're going to get hotter. Slotted rotors are useful because they remove gases and water and dust out of there. And that's it on that one. One takeaway from this is it's kind of obvious, but it's easy to work on it when you know what things are doing. But just for like disassembly and assembly, instead of memorizing that this hose went from here to here, you now know why this hose goes from here to here, and so it makes sense to you. So you're putting things together because you know why it's pulling air in from there. Use the factory service manual for troubleshooting. It has step-by-step procedures to diagnose common problems, and that's what a professional mechanic would use. And it's all written out there. It steps you through it. So it's a really good resource to utilize that a lot of people just overlook. If you do request help from a social media group, make it easier for people to help you. For one, take a photo of your engine or whatever it is that you're working on. The photo, you might be able to determine what the cause of the problem is just from the photo. But the photo can also rule out causes. So you look at it and say, okay, this is okay, this is okay, this is okay, it's not that, then it's something else. So the person that's trying to help you knows where to focus their thoughts. And so yeah, it'd be helpful to do it to a photo, because you could just spot a problem. These trucks have changed hands so many times that a new owner might not be able to just spot a problem. There was a guy took a photo, and his idle adjustment screw had this big, huge thing in there, and he didn't know it. What the problem was. So yeah, pictures are very helpful. Videos can be helpful, especially for like the flashing light for the trouble code diagnostics. That's something that's helpful. Can't always hear everything across on the videos that well, so when people are they hear a problem, the video doesn't always pick it up. Videos move around slowly to allow the camera to adjust and get a good high resolution photo, because if you stop a video, sometimes it's blurred, and so they can be useful, but if you're going too fast, it kind of defeats the purpose. Reels, to me, are not very useful because you can't back them up, and you just can't control them, where a video seems to work much better. When you do request help, use white space, carriage returns, instead of like a big, huge block of text. Break things up, and especially if you have a list of things, it's nice to put them just like on a separate line. So like this is a list of all the parts I've already replaced, and it just makes it easier for everybody to just scan quickly and put the pieces of the puzzle together in their head so that they can help you. So yeah, white space and blank so you can gather things. Sometimes it's just a huge block of text, and it's hard to get everything to absorb it all. Include the year of your engine, what type of engine you got. People often ask a question in a group that's specific to the truck and not to the engine, and they don't tell you what engine that they've got. So it could be, and then even when it's in a 22R group, it could often be a carbureted or EFI, so you got to state that. Just provide all the relevant details to make it easier for someone to help you. Provide a good description of the behaviors and the symptoms that are occurring. People will say things like, it won't start. Well, then what does it do? When you turn the key, do you hear a click? Is it silent? Do you hear the starter turn over? Telling people what it does do is more helpful than telling what it doesn't do. And then also, do you have the same behaviors when it's hot and cold? Because that's a lot of the system has things that work differently when it's hot and when it's cold. And that's all I've got for you, and I hope you enjoyed this video.
This video is sponsored by California Trail Map, the most accurate trail map available for California and Nevada. The color of the trails indicate how they can be used. Street legal motor vehicles, off-highway vehicles, biking, horseback, hiking. There are 3 background options to choose from. The land boundary background indicates the type of public land. There's a topo gradient background. Then there's a transparent background that allows you to display the trail map on top of another map or satellite imagery. There are 7 zoom levels that progressively add details as you zoom in. This makes the map a lot more usable on small screens. There are icons for all the points of interest, with the more interesting points being displayed at a higher zoom level to make them easier for you to discover. The map loads into Android and iPhone apps, Garmin GPS receivers, TrailTech Voyager Pro GPS receivers, and can be viewed on a Mac or Windows computer. It's a one-time purchase for the downloadable file formats, and there's also a tile service that can be purchased with a yearly subscription fee.